We are on week 12. You can download the notes off of my blog, www.hilarioushomeschooling.com, on the Ready to Homeschool tab. We have been doing a six-month countdown, and we are on week 12. This one will not be a very long video today. I just have some things that we're going to be talking about homeschool legalities in the 50 states and around the world. And the only one I know anything about is Iowa. So I really can't give you a ton of direction if you are not living in Iowa. And I won't take the time to tell everything about Iowa today yet either. So this is going to be a shorter one because more of the responsibility is going to fall on you to do the homework and find out what the laws are in your state or your country or wherever you're living. I wanted to start out with our Bible verses today because, again, this is a fine line that you're going to have to walk as a family. Because homeschool is now legal in all 50 states, it is possible to obey the government and homeschool your kids. But back in the 70s and 80s, that wasn't true. There's a lot of homeschool pioneer families who spent time in jail because they would not put their kids in the public school as they felt the Lord had called them to educate their children at home and not give them over to the government-funded schools that they didn't think were teaching what their kids needed to know. So I'm going to read 2 Bible verses, and I want you to think about how these apply to you and your family. The first one is Romans 13:1. It says, "Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God." So this is in Romans, and it is clearly saying that we are expected as Christians to obey our government and our governing authorities in everything that we possibly can. But if you flip back over, and actually there's several verses in Romans 13 if you wanted to read the whole section that clarify a little bit more of what we're talking about. But if you flip back over to Acts 5, you find a story where Peter and fellow disciples were in trouble for disobeying the governing authorities. As Christians, they had chosen to keep preaching about Jesus, and they got in trouble for it. And his answer in Acts 5:29, Peter and the other apostles replied, "We must obey God rather than men." And that was his reason for disobeying the governing authorities, is that they were telling Peter and the other apostles to do something against what God had ordained for them to do. So this is the fine line that you have to walk as a family. You have to decide, has God called you to homeschool? And if so, what steps are you prepared to take to disobey the government in your area? I don't have an answer for you. I am so thankful that homeschooling is legal in Iowa, and I don't have to try to fight this out in my own mind and have, long conversations with my husband about how we're going to either, obey this part but not this part. Disobedience to the government should only happen when you are convinced that God has called you to do something other than that. So think about those situations when you're dealing with your own authorities in your own district or your own state, your own region, your own country, and think through what God is asking you to do. Be convinced in your own heart and then obey God, no matter what the government is telling you. All right, so on to the notes. I've already said it's legal to homeschool in all 50 states and some countries, but your job now that you are taking responsibility for your child's education is to find out what those rules are, what those laws are, and how you can fulfill them, how you can obey them, and how you can cooperate to the best of your ability to be able to continue homeschooling with integrity in your area where you live. You can move. A lot of times families actually move so that they can go to a place where homeschooling is more friendly and more possible for their family. You can also move to a different school district. If you feel like your kids are supposed to be in the public school, but you're in an area where the public schools are not helpful and not godly, you can do some homework and find a different area of the country to move to. Now, that's not always possible for every family, but I'm saying you have options. We live in a country where you do have options. So even though that's a drastic thing to think about, it's possible. I wanted to spend a lot of time talking about the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and that is the bulk of the notes here. HSLDA is how it's abbreviated. There's a ton of information on the website about them as well. It's an annual membership, so you can pay for a membership every single year, and I would advise that you do if you're financially able to do that. It is worthwhile to pay your membership dues annually because you can support their work. They are providing legal counsel for families around the United States who have gotten into trouble for homeschooling. Even when they are doing what the state has required them to do, there are still certain districts where they get in hot water and a district attorney comes after them, truancy laws, things like that. So HSLDA will look at everything in a case-by-case basis, and if they believe that the family has been doing their best to abide by the state's homeschooling laws and are still getting into legal trouble in the courts, HSLDA will step up, and sometimes they don't necessarily like appear in person, but they will write letters, they will make phone calls, they will serve on your behalf. And that all comes with a membership, which is, I think, still less than $200 a year. So that's a really good deal. And even if you don't ever have to take advantage of it, you know that you are helping other families around the United States to continue to be able to homeschool legally in their situation. There's a lot more stuff on the website. That's not all that they do. They also provide counsel for their member families, one-on-one counseling, assistance in making special ed lesson plans and long-term plans for students. So if you feel like you could take advantage of something that they have to offer, please look on their website and investigate all that they have, because it's quite a bit and it's a really good deal. They also have information on one of their web pages about all 50 states' homeschooling laws and what it takes to abide by them, whether it's like keeping track of your hours and documenting that, whether it's reporting to a school teacher once a year or 8 times a year, or there's no homeschooling laws at all and you can do whatever you want. It has information about that on its webpage, and then probably usually up in the top right hand corner they also give you a link to each state's homeschooling pages that would be helpful for whatever state you're living in. I want to point out that there are certain states that allow dual enrollment. Dual enrollment is where you can homeschool your child and be in complete control of their education, but you, because you're a taxpayer and a citizen, you have right to access the public school and all of its services on whatever need you have for that year. So in Iowa, we have this. We have something called dual enrollment, and I can decide what classes I want my kids to take at the high school, or what sports I want them to participate in, or if it's extracurricular, if there's a club that they want to join, or maybe just track for this year. I have the option to contact my district, my school district, and tell them what I want my kids to opt into. And we have a wonderful school district who is very cooperative and usually bends over backwards to make it so that our kids can be a part of whatever they want to be. We have 2 high schoolers right now that are taking 2 classes each at the high school every afternoon. And it works out great because they drive into school, they take those 2 classes, they drive home, and they're learning to be responsible to a different teacher. They're getting to know some of the other kids in our community, but I am still the one who's completely in charge of deciding what classes they're going to take and how I'm going to grade them and how I want to put those public school classes on their transcript. So it's almost just like electives for them, whereas public school students in our district are completely under the control of the public school high school, deciding what they're going to do and what classes they're going to take and how that's going to be on their transcript and stuff like that. So it is a good option if you have a school district that is worth participating in. That's something that you'll have to look at and ask other parents around in your community. If that is an option for you, work on cultivating great relationships. Work on being kind and timely and polite and get your requests in early, and remember that they are not responsible to you if they forget to call you because all the third graders went on a field trip and they forgot to tell you that there's not going to be music class that day. That just kind of goes with the territory. Because the public school is in charge of all of the students in one grade, they know, and they've told everybody in their own school, oh, by the way, the third graders have a field trip. But that doesn't necessarily mean they remember to include the homeschool families in that communication loop. And that's just something that is frustrating. But if you lose your temper and let fly at the secretary, you are damaging a relationship that you could have cultivated instead. Be gracious, be forgiving, be kind, and just continue to show up when you've said you'll show up. I just want to encourage you to be the light of Christ, even when you feel like you're a citizen and a taxpayer and you have rights, all of that kind of stuff. Just remember that you represent Christ in every situation that you have, and that you want to be shining his light into every situation. And also your child will take on your attitude as well. If they see going to the public school as a privilege and something to take advantage of in a kind and gracious and thankful way, because you have modeled that, then they're going to go farther in life than if they are demanding, rude, huffy. You don't want that. You don't want that in your child, and you don't want that for yourself. So guard against that. And if you feel like you're starting to get frustrated with something that's going on at the public school, ask yourself what it is that's causing you to feel that way. And if you can address that in a constructive way, maybe you do have to have a conversation with the principal or the secretary, and but do it gently, do it kindly, do it in a way that will reflect that you are a Christian. Okay, so you have some action items. They're at the bottom of the list, and they're things that you will need to do in order to handle the homeschool legalities for your family. Print or download anything that you can find on homeschool laws or policies in your state. If you can do the research now, still several months out before you start homeschooling, you will be much more prepared to document what you need to document, or call who you need to call, or fill out the forms that you need to fill out. And interestingly enough, every state has their own way of going about this. And in Iowa, they've changed the law so many different times that there's actually 5 different ways you can homeschool in Iowa. And it seems like every law just kind of built upon the one before it, but they never actually got rid of any of the laws before that. So if you're in a similar state where the legislature has gone back and forth from being anti-homeschool to pro-homeschool, and back to anti-homeschool, and back to pro-homeschool, you're going to see a history in the laws that reflect, a tighter control or more freedom. And so you're going to want to probably spend a little bit of extra time trying to understand that in your state, so that you can understand more of the options that you have and the history of what the public school leaders in your state have been dealing with over the last 10, 15, 20 years. If you can find out a state's homeschool organization that exists, go ahead and join it if you're financially able. They will have more information about conferences in your area, local support groups, leaders, and they might also offer some one-on-one counseling similar to what HSLDA does, but that will vary by state again. If you can find the names and phone numbers of local homeschool organizers or support groups in your area, go ahead and write those down. You don't necessarily have to call them yet or do anything with it yet, but just start to make a little page for yourself of interesting information and people that you might be able to connect with down the road. If you can find out the date of an upcoming homeschool conference in your area, put that on your calendar. Not committing yourself to go, but just reminding yourself there is something coming up this summer that we might be able to take advantage of. And later down the road, you can decide if that's something you want to do or not. Find out if there's any used bookstores in your area that feature homeschool curriculum specifically, or older books that you might be able to use to start a library. Down where my sister lives in Springfield, Missouri, there's a used bookstore that will buy back homeschool curriculum and put it on the shelves. And then, if you wanted to look at history curriculum for next year, you can just go into this store and browse the history curriculum, and it's usually at a discount of at least 50%. But, my sister gets a little bit of money for consigning her used homeschool curriculum there. So just ask around if there's any used bookstores like that. You can call used bookstores and ask them if they happen to have homeschool curriculum, and not saying you have to go shopping yet. You're just making yourself a resource list so that you know what's more available where you live. Also, if you know any previous homeschooling families or current homeschool families that you think you might be comfortable talking to, just go ahead and start a list of them too, especially if they live nearby and can help you understand more about the state and local policies that you'll be dealing with in the future. And again, you don't have to start a conversation with them right now. You're just making a resource list for yourself. This will take a little bit of your time. This will take a little bit of energy. But that is your assignment for this week, is just to research what you can do legally in your area and what are some of the precedents, things that have been done before that other families have taken advantage of. Or you might hear some stories if you start talking to these families about homeschool things that sounded great and then they ended up turning sour. So knowing some of this stuff ahead of time is going to be able to help you decide what kind of relationships you want to have with a public school in your area. But also take everything with a grain of sand. I heard some terrible things about our high school before our kids were in it. And we have now had kids in the high school off and on for the past 12 years. And it's been wonderful. The opportunities that they've had there to be able to participate in different, like the musical and science trips and just leadership opportunities, art awards. I have been very, very, very impressed. Still homeschooling, but very impressed with our local high school. So I just want to let you know that you're going to be making your own judgments about what the school district is like in your area. But don't always assume just because somebody else had a bad experience that you would have a bad experience as well. Prayerfully consider your options and what is available to your kids. Week 14, we're discussing Wisdom's Way of Learning by Marilyn Hauschall. The link is on the handout. It's just a $3 ebook download. Before we go, I just want to encourage you. I know that we have not talked a lot about academics, except for last week we finally got to reading. And before that, we discussed Bible as an academic subject. We are going to be covering the other academic subjects in the next few weeks. But I wanted to encourage you with all the different things that we have talked about in the past 10 weeks or so, and remind you that we are not homeschooling in a vacuum. The atmosphere that your children are in matters. You can have the best academic education in the world, but if it's in an atmosphere that is disrespectful or uses foul language or has drug deals going out in the hallway all the time, that's going to affect your child. It is not all about academics. The atmosphere that you're providing in your home is going to impact the way that the academics can be delivered. So I want to encourage you that the things that we have already covered in the past 10 weeks will help you to set up an orderly home environment that will impact your kids physically, emotionally, mentally, and their soul. You are caring for them on all of those levels, whether you ever put a book in front of them or not. Those are the kinds of things you want as a parent to provide for your kids. There's also the habits and expectations that we have for our kids and other kids who might be around our kids. We want to have kids who respect authority and are obedient, take responsibility, pay attention, and have a servant heart. And all the things that we've been talking about in the last 10 weeks are helping you design your home environment to prepare your student to be this kind of a student. Also, I want to encourage you as parents to not be afraid to give vision and leadership to your family. There is this idea that, and this is something I struggled with when we first had kids, is that, if we live in a democracy and every person is equal and we want every person to have an equal voice, shouldn't I let, my 6 kids decide what we're going to do instead of me? And the answer to that is no. Because of what God has set up with authority structures in the Bible, He has given you as the parent the responsibility and the authority in your home to set the pace, to set the vision, and to give leadership. Children do not have the maturity that they need to do long-range planning and to think through eternal issues. And that is why they are children. When they're young, they don't have the forethought to put into big decisions. And so you can take what your children have to say into account when you're making decisions, but they cannot be treated as an equal partner yet in making big decisions for their life. Now, that is a continuum, and as they get to the teenage years, you should be relinquishing some of your leadership and vision to them because it's their life, and they are the ones heading out into the world to do whatever God's called them to do. So as they get into the teenage years, there should be more of a, I don't want to say quite equal yet, but more of an acknowledgement that your children are going to have to take responsibility for their future and releasing some of that decision making to them. And that is a scary process, and there will be mistakes. And loving them through those mistakes and reminding them that you are still caring for them, you are still their parent, you are still taking responsibility for them during this time. It's just like, a baby bird starting to hop around outside the nest. You're still the parent, you're still having responsibility and oversight for that child's life. And as you release control and let them take on a little bit more leadership and they fail, it's not the end of the world. And you can reassure them that you're still there and you're still guiding them and you're still giving them, food, physical, emotional, mental, and soul care because you're still the parent. Hopefully by the time they're 18 to 20, they'll be ready to fly on their own and you can release them even more. So pray for those things and remember to keep on doing all of these things that we've talked about in the first 10 weeks as we start to layer on the academics. Don't neglect what we've talked about with the foundation of the first 10 weeks. That is why we're going slow, is to give you time to establish these habits and these expectations so that when you start homeschooling in the fall, your kids will not be slammed upside the head with something new and difficult. It will just simply be the next layer in something that you've been building for months and months. So that's it for this week. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.